Axonius Federal Systems gives federal agencies the confidence to control complexity by mitigating threats, navigating risks, automating response times, and complying with federal cybersecurity guidelines. AFS is the only federal solution available that integrates with hundreds of sources to provide asset observability. Hello from Omaha. My name is Ross John Fortune. I'm recording from DoDIIs 2024, where leaders across the national security world are examining the future of integrated defense through IT superiority. Joining me now is Christopher Page, Intelligence CIO and Deputy Director of OpNav Intelligence of the OpNav Intelligence Division. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Ross, and thank you for having me here today.
It's 2024. You can't have these conversations without talking about AI. So how is AI transforming that the Navy collects, analyzes, and distributes intelligence?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And I'll tell you, it's very important to begin with the why. Why do we go about the business of collecting and analyzing distributed intelligence? And I think a big part of that answer lies in America's warfighting Navy. If you look at Admiral Franchetti, our Chief of Naval Operations, recently put out her navigation plan for America's warfighting Navy. And that really gives us a sense of purpose. In very dramatic fashion, it starts off by reminding the audience that we do face the very real possibility of having to go to war against the People's Republic of China as early as 2027. We're trying within naval intelligence to rise to that challenge. And a lot of what AI is doing is giving us a chance not just to reevaluate how we do our jobs, but to reimagine how we bring the tools and tradecraft of intelligence into the business of war at sea. Where I think the reimagination has led us is to realize that there is now in front of us the possibility of being able to increase the volume of collection. And I really define that in terms of the numbers of platforms with sensors on them that we can bring to bear against targets in all sorts of warfighting domains. That includes space, air, the surface of the ocean, and below the ocean. I think, too, about the variety of collection, and that we're no longer really limited to a single discipline. We can work across all the intelligence collection disciplines, whether it's geospatial intelligence, signals intelligence, or all the other things that we can do these days from the platforms. I think about velocity, in that a lot of the things that maybe held us back before was the amount of time it took to be able to go from collecting data to being able to provide the answers to the commanders in the field and at sea. Those are big deals. New volume, new variety, new velocity. The other one is the veracity, the truthfulness, the accuracy, the precision. To be able to actually tell a commander with a very high level of fidelity where something is. This gets into what Admiral Whitworth had talked about earlier today, the importance of geo-precision. And really that all lines up to more value. And we really measure value these days, at least in the operational intelligence sense, in terms of kill chains. And a lot of what I talked about is going through what's called the find, fix, and track part of the kill chain. And so to be able to present our commanders with the ability to prosecute more targets at a higher rate really gives them an advantage they would not have had prior to this era of AI.
Yeah, I know Admiral Franchetti has talked about autonomous systems and AI and technology really aiding conventional systems. It sounds like that's a big part of the intelligence world as well.
It sure is.
So moving to the cybersecurity side of things, how are you protecting that infrastructure at OpNav, and how are you making sure that the targets and the adversaries aren't getting the information that you have stored and that you're using?
Yeah, I thank you for that question as well. And when we think about infrastructure, we're beginning to think about it more and more in terms of what we call foundation. And really the foundation translates into things like our shipyards, or aviation depots, or laboratories, or intelligence centers. Those are important for many reasons. One of the most important reasons is that they become the means by which we generate and posture the force for success. And so we are spending a lot more time looking holistically at how we protect that infrastructure. A lot of that has a lot to do with cyber. And so we are really trying to go back and take another harder look at our networks, whether the research, development, testing, and evaluation networks, or the networks that support day-to-day operations and sustainment, and trying to think about how we safeguard them against both the external threat and the insider threat. There's two groups I'd really like to mention when I think about how we're protecting that infrastructure. One is the Office of Naval Intelligence, and the one is the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. On the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI side, We've got a group of people who are very focused on providing intelligence support to acquisition. And why that becomes important is you've got within that shore infrastructure your program executives, your program managers, your systems commands, others who are involved in a key part of force generation. And we want to make sure that they truly understand the threats to be countered. On the NCIS side, we've got a program called Critical Infrastructure Protection, and that is trying to bring the tools and tradecraft of counterintelligence to bear in order to prevent foreign intelligence elements from penetrating and exploiting that infrastructure. Many, many more people involved, but I really wanted to mention those two players as we talk about critical infrastructure protection.
Yeah, can you expand on the NCIS side of things? Because I know that in the CIO panel earlier today, they talked a lot about insider threats and things like that. How does that sort of go forward, especially in the cybersecurity and those concerns?
That's a great question. So just like intelligence, counterintelligence is going through a bit of a transformation as we think about what the digital era really means. And so there is still the very traditional aspect of trying to chase spies, basically. But then also we're trying to think a lot more about how to defeat those foreign intelligence entities in the cyber domain. And so the team over at NCIS, just like its partners throughout the defense establishment, have really been putting a lot of effort into trying to deal with that. Some of it is defensive. Yeah, how do I now help our acquisition programs and others better fend off those adversaries through decisive action, to include security actions? And some of it's a little bit more proactive, trying to get after those things that occasionally pop up in the news. And we do have some success in being able to arrest and prosecute people involved in espionage.
Another thing that has come up a lot during this conference and generally when I talk to people in these roles is that no one can go at it alone.
Right.
So there's certainly within government and within the military services and within even with partners and allies, information sharing, interoperability, making sure everybody's can read whatever the information is. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you can make sure that this is seamless and that everything works for everybody?
I sure can. Partnership is a huge part of our strategy. I'd like to do is talk about the partnerships that exist at a few different levels. One, within the sea services, second, across the joint force, then across the interagency, and then international. Within the sea services, we partner very closely with the Marine Corps and with the Coast Guard, as you might expect, but also with people like Customs and Border Protection Service. And you'll see that played out in things like our Minotaur initiative. And what that initiative is really aimed at doing is being able to bring together the data being collected by lots of different platforms, air, surface, and shore, and being able to bring them together into an integrated data layer that we can then present not only to the other sea services, but to the broader interagency and joint collective. That's a big deal, and it's been really exciting to partner up with my colleagues from those other elements and really try to shape and steer where we're going with Minotaur. Within the joint force, I'll tell you, and I'm glad that we're here at DoDIIs, because one of the many enablers of the joint force's success has been JWICS, which has really been the heart and soul of the conversation today, and has really been underlying DoDIIs meetings since the early 1990s. It is amazing what we've been able to achieve together with the rest of the joint force by being on a common wide area network. But it doesn't stop there. A lot of the discussion within, not just within the building, but across the force over the last couple of years, has been about data. We've been talking about data orchestration. We've been talking about rethinking how we do joint targeting. We've been talking a lot about how we reimagine PED, or processing, exploitation, and dissemination. And so very happy to be part of the team that is really trying to break down those problems and solve them. On the interagency side, certainly JWICS, again, has been a very big part of the interagency process, but I'll tell you, it is a rare day that we're not working closely with somebody either elsewhere in the IC or within the broader interagency. And one of the vehicles that really allows us to have that conversation is Maritime Domain Awareness, or MDA. Navy's got a role to play, a pretty important role to play in MDA, but it's part of a broader federal and state and local team that is thinking about how do we do a better job of giving leaders at all levels situational awareness regarding the things that are happening at sea. And that's been a very, very exciting effort. And then on the international front, we've certainly heard quite a bit about the Five Eyes collectives this week, and yay, verily, that's an important part of what we do. But we've also got AUKUS, we've got NATO. You've probably seen in the news this week that one of our strike groups is operating up in the high north, really working to remind everybody of our commitment to NATO and to our presence in the Northern European waters. But it goes beyond that. And again, I'd encourage you to take a look at some of the things that we've put out there recently in the public domain to really demonstrate the strength of our partnership with the Republic of Korea, with Japan, and with the Republic of the Philippines.
Yeah, certainly in the Indo-Pacific area, I know, in South Asia, I know that is a big part of it. Recently, I wanted to go back to the Minotaur project. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how it's bringing together the sea services, particularly on the data side?
It really grew out of the aviation side of what we do, and that the whole reason to send a patrol aircraft out over the horizon is to go find things and bring them back. And we realized that the older method of radio voice reporting or waiting for the aircraft to land probably wasn't necessarily effective. And so we've really tried to get into the data layer and try to make sure that the data coming off those sensors on that aircraft are immediately available to our carrier strike groups, our maritime operations centers, and others with an interest. In fact, usually a huge part of what we're doing is we transition from the very familiar world of the P3 type airframes into a new world where we've got a combination of the P8 Poseidon airframes and the MQ-4 Triton and a couple other platforms that are really representing the future of maritime patrol and reconnaissance.
To expand on that a little bit, the import of getting that information to the warfighters as quickly as possible. How does OpNav involve with that, and what is the outcomes and the desired sort of future of it?
A lot of it is, remember, we're informed by our history. And so if you think about one of the things that allowed us to be extremely successful during the Battle of Midway, and conversely maybe unsuccessful in the Battle of the Java Sea, was the amount of time it took to get reporting from our PBYs, from our maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft back to the firing unit or the carrier. When there is good, clear, crisp, rapid connectivity, it's amazing what we can do. And when it takes hours to get the report back, it's amazing what we can't do. And so as we are working in our role as resource sponsor, requirements manager, we're working through the Naval Air Systems Command and its affiliated program executive offices, and with a couple other key players in acquisition to make sure that Minotaur is delivered to the fleet when and where needed.
Excellent. Is there anything we didn't cover that you did want to hit?
No, the only thing I would just want to cover is if you think about our strategy for achieving information superiority. Very important, I think, for the audience to know that there are probably three big things that are very important going forward. One is our Chief of Naval Operations has placed emphasis on gaining the ability to fight from the MOC, or the Maritime Operations Center. That's a relatively new concept within Navy doctrine, within Navy tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so we're working very closely with our Naval Information Forces, or NAV-I4 in its role as the MOC Type Commander, working very closely with our systems commands and with others in the fleet to really think about how do we operationalize this concept of being able to conduct operational level warfare from the MOC. And from an intel perspective, that's a huge deal. It's a lot to do with where we place our analytical expertise, where we deliver analytics, and how we deal with our data. And so I'm really thinking that in the years ahead, we're going to see a lot of changes, big changes in the way that we do intelligence through the MOCs. The second is we're continuing to operationalize this thought of distributed maritime operations. And if you think about it, it wasn't that many years ago that the Navy would really operate in a very concentrated form. We would have the strike group with our escorts in very close proximity. Now it's not unusual for our forces to be distributed across hundreds, if not thousands, of square nautical miles of sea space. If you think about the reports last year at this time, with USS Carney being so successful in dealing with an emergent threat, one that I don't think anybody would have envisioned even the day before, that's an example of DMO, of a commander being able to operate independent of the carrier strike group and be able to act on commander's intent at the point of need. So a lot of what we're doing in intel then is thinking about, hey, not only how do I deliver intelligence to the MOC, but how do I empower those aggregated forces, the DDGs, the destroyers, the submarines, the other individual units. And so a lot of what we're doing now is thinking about that small form factor intelligence equipment. How do we train those independent duty intelligence specialists? How do we now, record their lessons and then spread them out to the rest of the force? Then the third part, and this really is, I guess, think of it as the glue between those two, is how we really bring robotics and automated systems into the mix. Some of it is pretty obvious, like as I talked about earlier, as we move to a combination of unmanned MQ-4 and manned P-8, and some of it is still very nascent. Then I'd encourage you, if you haven't already done so, take a look at the hybrid fleet work underway, not just in CTF 59 in the Middle East, but right closer to home, Fourth Fleet in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico. There's been some amazing work down there. A lot of that is really aimed at thinking about how do we better integrate those small, sometimes unmanned systems into a traditionally manned fleet and be able to achieve some pretty important effects.
Yeah, the combination of man and machine, to excuse the cliche, I think is absolutely critical for the future, I imagine. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening. This podcast was a production of GovCIO Media and Research. If you like what you heard, please leave a 5-star rating and review on the podcast platform of your choice. And don't forget to tell a friend or colleague. To explore the rest of our content, visit our website, govciomedia.com. Do you have a topic you want us to discuss? Contact us at newsletter@govcio.com. I'm Ross John Fortuné.